First of all, Andrew, if I may ask you, from the numbers that you have seen, is this across the board? In other words, did you get a sense that police officers are being poorly paid across the board, or is it just a certain category or categories?
Rio, thanks very much for having me. The starting salary of around 160,000 Rand for a constable is the lowest, and most South African Police Service members are constables. It isn't just for those being re-enlisted, it is the standard entry salary. I think it's important to note, however, that in the South African context, that isn't a low salary. A 20-year-old who earns 160,000 Rand a year is in the wealthiest 5% of income earners. But policing is a particular environment where you have individuals with immense discretionary power working beyond the supervisor's gaze and able to make decisions that can make and break people's lives. And that's why policing in particular is vulnerable to abuse of power.
Okay. But have you done any comparative studies, looking at factors such as a country's, the country's size of the economy and so on? Have you done any of that?
I haven't conducted a particular study on income, but there have been numerous studies around the world that look at correlations between income and corruption. And I think that there is some indecisiveness between them, but the general finding is that police salaries, increasing police salaries don't reduce police corruption. There's a very interesting study that came out of Ghana a few years ago, where police in Ghana had their salaries double overnight. And this was during a period in which a study was underway tracking roadside corruption. And rather than the doubled salaries leading to a reduction in corruption, police actually asked for more bribes and they asked for more money. So police were literally earning twice as much money, but they asked for more bribes from the truck drivers they were stopping. And I think one finds similar things elsewhere. So if one imagines being a police officer, you've got lots of power, you work without a manager watching you, you might get into bad routines of abusing power, taking kickbacks, and now you wake up and your salary's been increased by 25%. I don't think that 25% is going to make you change your behavior. In the South African context, being a South African police officer is a bit like winning the lottery. We have 27% unemployment, we've got 40% youth unemployment. A job in the South African Police Service is a job for life. It allows you to access credit because you've got guaranteed income for 40 or 50 years. It means a huge amount, and as such, I don't think we should simply look at the monthly salary. We need to consider the full package. We need to consider it within the South African context, and we need to recognize that in the South African context, earning a constable's salary puts you in a very wealthy class. You have more purchasing power as an entry-level constable in South Africa than you do as an entry-level constable in London, for example. The equivalent salary goes further here. It represents more here. It puts you in a much higher income bracket in South Africa than many other police organizations in other countries.
Do you think Popcrew and Sapu will agree with you there, especially your last comments?
I mean, these are empirical questions that can be tested, and I'm happy to have them tested. I think they are true. I think the bigger problem, and this goes to the problem of crime as well, South Africa is just a very unjust society. We have far too much inequality. So poverty, for instance, if we were talking about crime, poverty doesn't generate crime, but inequality does. So poverty in the shadow of immense wealth generates crime. And I think one finds something similar in police corruption. A salary a decent salary doesn't generate corruption, but a decent salary in a country where what is heralded is a tiny, tiny percentage of the country that can drive BMWs and Mercedes, that's going to generate disgruntlement and a feeling of poverty. So a police officer might feel poor, and that might lead to disgruntlement. And I don't discount that as a problem. I don't think raising salaries will address that. We need to address the huge structural inequality that pervades throughout South African life.
So it's not something unique to policing, even though we still, of course, need to pay attention to police's salaries and working conditions.
Absolutely, and working conditions are very important. So my position is police salaries are good by South African standards. Of course, they could be increased. What would be much better is if every household in South Africa had somebody earning a police constable's salary. If everybody had a breadwinner earning a police constable's salary, we would have a lot less social ills. At the same time, for a police organization to be effective, it has to treat its employees fairly. They need to feel respected. They need to feel like they have dignity. And there's a fine balance between clamping down on, for example, ill discipline and corruption without alienating your workforce. I think if you alienate your workforce, again, they're more likely to shift away and potentially abuse their power, even if they're being well remunerated, even if they have other decent conditions of service like medical aid.
Andrew, thanks very much for your time and insights. He is, of course, from the Institute for Security Studies. Some really interesting thoughts.